Okay. So we're recording now. I'm Tom Mihawk, and this is a podcast that I do in support of my personal finance teaching. And I'm thrilled to have with me Heema Khedr. He, Heema, welcome.
Thanks so much, Tom, for having me.
Heema was a student of mine. I think he graduated in 2015. Is that right?
That is right.
So he's 5 or 6 years now, 6 years out of undergrad. And I knew Heema as an undergrad to be just and some of this comes from his bio at his website, but I'm going to put it in my words to say that I always viewed him as a go-getter. Heema was uncommonly good with people. He was a young man that showed up with a purpose. And Heema was serving as captain of the men's club soccer team. We had some conversations, as you do, faculty and students, not extensive, but some about sports and things you like to do. Heema knew I'd coached soccer, and he asked me, I guess there was a transition, I don't know. He'd asked me if I'd serve as faculty advisor, which I accepted. And he was captain. I went out and watched him play. I found him to be a student leader and a leader as a young man. He has always struck me as a young man with good intentions and a decent, hardworking person. And along those lines, uncommon, I think, for young people graduating from undergrad, Heema took on a job where you basically eat what you kill. Heema works for a very large real estate firm called Compass. And as best I can tell, Heema's had great success so far. He's a graduate of Villanova University. He's originally from New Jersey, where he played soccer as a young person, still plays soccer, lives now in Greenwich Village, loves it, lives in Manhattan. And he's also philanthropic, which is no surprise. He lists Operation Smile and Children's Miracle Network. I'm sure there are others that he's involved with. But I wanted to get Heema because I wanted to ask him some questions that I could share with my students and others that'll watch this podcast connected with my personal finance teaching. Heema, welcome. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for the kind words, Tom, and having me. And to kind of preference, when Tom reached out to ask me on this podcast, I called him up and said, hey, we'd love to participate, but just based on the nature of what I do, it's a little bit different in terms of thinking of personal finance and whatnot, just having a 100% commission role. So take that with a grain of salt, and hopefully I can offer a pretty unique side of how to keep in contact of like your finances and whatnot in a different lens.
Heema, that gives me the opportunity to take the techniques and the knowledge that we have and emphasize how important it is to make it fit for yourself, and make it work for yourself. So I was going to ask you, if you don't mind, to kick it off, to just walk us through your experience with personal finance. Where did you start with it? How did you learn what personal finance even means? Did it ever come up at the dinner table at home as you were growing up? I mentioned that you were in my course, but prior to the course or even including the course, what were your beginnings with personal finance?
And I appreciate that, Tom. So I think, what's really important is, teachers besides yourself and the whole schooling system do not stress the importance of it. Throughout high school, throughout college, you take all kinds of subjects in your major and extracurricular activities and all that kind of stuff. But, personal finance, I only took, I think, Tom, it was my senior year, right?
Yeah, I think so. And most do at seniors.
And that was my first exposure to it, and it's such a vital part of your life post-college when you're in the real world that, I wish I took it all 4 years throughout college, right? So, my first exposure to it on like a higher level was the class, right? And then, I've actually always learned by doing. That's just the way the best way I learn. So I probably took the class either, I think, the fall or spring of my senior year. Then, I graduated May 16th and I started working May 26th. And all of a sudden you have to apply all the principles that you learned and try and figure out what works for you. And I think the biggest stress I can make for, personal finances, there's not one right way to do it. And the reason why I say that is, I entered a role that is 100% commission based. So I'm a co-head of a team at a real estate company called Compass. They're actually pretty big in Boston now as well, Tom, I think up there. But
well, they made a huge hiring effort, maybe, I don't know, a year and a half or two ago. They must have gotten big capital infusion because top producers were being hired all over the place and people were asking, who is this Compass?
Yeah, they actually just went public maybe 2 months ago, first week in April.
Terrific.
It's an awesome company, very grateful to be there. But anyways, just what I do is very different. And from a personal finance perspective, most jobs, especially out of college, you get a salary, then maybe some sort of bonus component. So it's a little bit easier to kind of keep track of your finances and whatnot. And I try to take the principles learned in Professor Mihawk's course and apply it to my own. And I learned very quickly, just based on the structure and nature of my work, I had to create kind of a different model that works for me.
But what do you mean, Heema? How do you use it today, and how is it unique in the way you view it?
Perfect. So, every month, there's my income is zero, right? It's, to your point, the eat what you kill. I'm 100%, which is the way my brain worked. And I knew when graduating from Villanova, I wanted a role that was 100%, compensated based on my own efforts. And
why? Everyone else has a job and they show up and they get paid. And I know they have to do something, but how did you know you wanted to eat what you could kill?
So kind of even the backstory of that, going into my senior year in college, there wasn't one subject that I really loved. I majored in economics and I minored in communications and Spanish. But, a lot of my buddies were like, hey, straight like finance route, or they want to do some sort of, consulting work. Or they really knew what they wanted to do. For me, I was really interested in, the startup. Like, I wasn't sure if I wanted to work at a startup. I really liked the idea of taking like an idea from the ground up and kind of seeing it come to fruition. And then I was reading a book that like piqued my interest in real estate, did a little digging, found a job. I went to the city, interview with a couple like larger brokerages. Everyone was like way older than me. I was like, it's 21.
Can't trust those older people, Heema.
Yeah, no, I was in a room interviewing, and even when I was taking my real estate tests, the average age was way over 40. I was like, oh my God, like, am I sure I want to do this? And every traditional brokerage or manager that I met with coming to the city, they're like, hey, you know what, circle back when you get your real estate license. I was on Facebook one day and saw a startup real estate company that tailored to recent grads. And I'll never forget when I was telling my parents that, hey, this is what I want to do, or I want to try it. The only thought process in my head was, hey, it's about to be, I was turned 22 in April, 21, turning 22. If I don't do this, I know I'd regret it for the rest of my life. And I'm very grateful I took that chance. And can't tell you how many family members or friends like, hey, you sure you want to do that?
I'm sorry. So you're saying that if you hadn't tried it then, you might not ever try it?
Exactly. That was the risk reward.
Because you felt what? You would have responsibilities or?
Yeah. It was, when you're young, you can take a shot at it, right? And everyone always says, when you're young, take as many chances as you can. And for me, it was something that I was very curious about, interested in. There wasn't one thing that I particularly loved in school, but or a subject or whatnot, but I love connecting with people. And it seemed to be like a pretty good fit. So when telling your parents that you're going to take a 100% commission role based
after they paid for Villanova tuition.
Exactly, which I was very grateful for. I learned at Villanova how to think, and over time, I've learned how my different parts of schooling have impacted the way I think about my own business, and have grown my team from 0 to now I'm the co-head of a team of 5. I took that shot, and I think even more importantly, because I've understood, even when we hire new agents onto our team, how important parental figures are to determine what they want to do. So, a lot of times my buddies, let's just say they went the finance route. Well, they went that route because their parents went that route, or that's kind of what you're told to do. So I'm forever grateful that my parents supported me with making a career move that I wanted to do. And they 100% backed me up because, I've just seen with hiring people that doesn't often happen to be the case. So forever grateful for that.
My guess, by the way, is that, I understand that I think it's prudent to think, I have few or low responsibilities now. Now's the time to take the chance. But my sense is, given your interests and your skill set, that you'll do it again in the future in some capacity.
I appreciate that. I took a shot, and there's only so many things we can control. But work ethic was one that I knew I could double down on. So it was kind of one of those things that's scary, but I knew I'd be able to work hard enough to figure it out.
Good for you. How do you use personal finance now? What do you do? And it could be related to specifically your career, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm thinking of things like budgets, cash payments, investments, the basic stuff that we talked about that you can remember you learned in the course. Just generally, how do you use it today?
Absolutely. So I learned very early on what I was doing because I don't have that steady, like consistent, like I know the exact dollar figure every month, right? I tried using Excel spreadsheets for the first 2 years. There's a lot of different apps, people use with Mint and all this kind of stuff to keep track of like, little like, subscriptions and all sorts of stuff.
And we look
But
at those things in the course. We did when you were there. Yeah.
so I don't know how often people use Mint or, all these other services. I feel like every day I'm getting some sort of ad for something to help keep track. But I learned quickly that the Excel spreadsheets and that kind of stuff, were helpful at first. It wouldn't really suit my business and just my own personal finances because of the nature of my business in terms of, I've cash flow coming in, but I'm also investing a lot into my own business. But something before I started in real estate, I've always been one into personal development, and a book that was highly recommended to me. It was, I guess it's called The Richest Man in Babylon. I think that the author is George Clason. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I read that sometime in college, and one of the main, I think if you can take one or two things away from a personal development book, you got the main purpose out of it. But something they talk about in the book is investing 10% of your income, right, into your future, right? So if I were to take any principle, that's been like the one carrying thing since I've started working. You can spend, but as soon as a paycheck does come in, I've been putting 10% into like an investment account, since I graduated. And people can do that differently. They can put it into, 401k or retirement account or whatever. But I've tried to make that a thing since I've started doing what I do, put 10% in before I allocate that towards, even an investment in my business or savings or.
So you do that monthly?
Monthly. So
good for you. And I would call that a term, an idea called pay yourself first. Which is where you take your 10%, I presume, based on what you're telling me, you take your 10% first before you pay bills, before you go out. And from a behavioral standpoint, no one used to call it this when I first heard of pay yourself first, but we know from behavioral finance these days that people don't always make decisions that are, what comes naturally to them is not always in their best interest. And so when you pay yourself first, you're not going to miss the 10% you're putting away. Your life just adjusts.
Exactly. So, because my, and when you say monthly, it's really just kind of when paychecks come in. It's not like an every 2 week thing or whenever kind of deals close. But that's the one variable I could control that you don't even see it, right? Just with however you set it up, and most companies can allocate whatever you get into a different account or whatnot. So that I would say that's like the main principle I've done. And then if you don't feel it on a monthly basis, the consistency, it's only been 6 years, but that was one aspect in an industry where I don't have control of what my monthly income would be. One thing I could control. So, you talked about budgets and all that kind of stuff. So I've learned over time, over the last 6 years, my monthlies have increased with more money I'm putting into my business. And it's funny, money into my business is taking clients out for dinners and taking people around in cars for like Ubers in between appointments and all this kind of stuff. So, and that changes on a weekly basis. So as long as my monthlies are covered, right, I've just tried to keep track of that over time to figure out a system that works for me. And now, if you asked me this question a year ago, it'd be a little different because I've entered a period of time that a lot of people in my network are getting married. So with that becomes
budget for wedding gifts.
That's something new that I'm having
travel.
Yes. Because wedding and a lot of people are having remote weddings, outside the tri-state area. So, in addition to that, there's bachelor parties and that kind of stuff. So that's something that an expense that I've now had to kind of budget or save for.
Heema, you mentioned before that you feel that your income and your choice of a career at this stage in your life are different than most, and I would agree. But you mentioned something I think really important, which is applicable, and it will help me in describing personal finance concepts, which is how you modify these things for yourself. And so I presume you didn't abandon personal finance tools, but rather you modify them to suit your needs and your personal goals. Your 10% goal is not one we necessarily talk about, although we could have, but it's not necessarily one we talk about in the course. But savings or having an emergency fund or those kinds of things are things we do talk about in terms of foundation elements. Can you think of any things that you've modified or ways you've chosen to apply? I mentioned in the course that, and I mentioned this to you once, that my dad, when I was just graduated from college, gave me this book he got probably at a stationery store with a plastic cover on it. Inside it had months, and you could write the month in, and had all these columns. And I wrote in my first month of working, which was July for me. And I wrote in all the coffees I bought, and all the newspapers I bought, and all the lunches. And, I don't know, Heem, if you remember this, but I'm an undergrad engineer. I still have this, engineering pencil, right? And I wrote it down, all these tiny little boxes. And at the end of the month, I said to my dad, Dad, I can't do this. This is way too much detail. And what I learned, and I've used Excel spreadsheets as I've gotten older and other kinds of tools. But what I found is it's really key to do these things. You're going to get married, do it for 6 months before you get married. You're going to get unfortunately, I've not gotten unmarried. Been married for 35 years as of last week, which is a real accomplishment.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's an achievement and an accomplishment you have to work at. But my point is, when you have life changes, you change states, change jobs, you have kids grow up, kids go to college. And so you might do it for a year, 6 months or whatever. So I'm interested for you. Any things you can think of that are customizations to the kinds of foundation elements we talk about that you've made these tools work for you?
Sure. So, and again, I think one of the biggest things that I'll stress, especially if I believe most of the people who will be listening to this are recent grads or whatnot. I think the biggest adjustment is going from a college lifestyle, right, to starting to work, right, and being a person, and making besides like internships, people work throughout college or whatnot, but getting like a paycheck that you're not used to, right, and that is your job. And so again, we help people. So I help people buy, sell, and rent real estate at all price points in the city. But our bread and butter, we help. I can't tell you how many recent grads first transition into New York, right? And something for me that I always like to stress to my clients is whatever it is, wherever your budget is, don't exceed it, right? And especially in a city like New York, right? Rent is only one aspect of living in New York. And I always say, hey, do not feel like you're spending so much money on rent that you can't go out and do things. So for example, in addition to your rent, you have your monthly electric bill, cable, all that kind of stuff, subway pass. But being a recent grad, you're excited, 22, want to have fun with your friends. Going out in a city like New York is not cheap, right? It's hard to go out to dinner and not or like a night evening out for drinks, dinner, food, all that kind of stuff. That adds up. And then especially, after work happy hour drinks, there's just a lot of pressures, right? So I think one of the biggest things to stress, which I had to learn too, and did not do a good job of right when graduating, and had to kind of realize it, was, you're going to feel the utmost pressure to go out, have fun, you're working hard. But money goes out pretty easily, pretty quickly. When you want to spend time with your friends and whatnot. So I think being able to instill some sort of these principles from the get-go, that only helps you later. And then you can, as your income changes or whatnot, you can kind of modify it. So like for me, as I've gotten older, more responsibilities, and again, to the entrepreneurial aspect of it, again, this is kind of like a contrarian way to view it, but the higher my monthly expenses are, it doesn't scare me. It actually propels, like, you kind of have to like work harder, right, to make that. And for me, we had like an assistant, and that adds extra costs and whatnot. So
Are you supporting people, Heema, on a payroll now?
an assistant, correct?
Yeah.
Right. So that changes certain lifestyles, being able to contribute to like family things or whatever it may be.
It's a lot of responsibility in making a payroll.
Correct. But it's an exciting part of it, and adjusting constantly to figuring out, okay. And also from like a business perspective, always trying to grow and get better and all that kind of stuff. So, one part of that is continuing to get better with those financial goals too, right? And kind of circling back to that 10%, right? Whatever you can allocate, so you can have X amount come out of a paycheck. Also you can say, hey, I want X amount of dollars coming out of your account every couple weeks, right? Even something like a little contribution like that over time, over the course of the year, it does help. And time flies. That's not to scare you. I still feel like I just graduated.
Heema, my kids were, your age not long ago, and they were little kids even not long before that, it seems. And now
Yep.
they're grown, my kids.
Yep. It's crazy. And I can't get away with the recent grad title anymore 6 years ago, although I might feel like that. But I think the biggest thing, even just I've learned with different friends or whatnot, I think one of the things we'll chat about a little bit later on is the discussion with friends and whatnot, and like leaning on maybe like a financial advisor or maybe other friends that have similar titles and roles and similar incomes or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's a very individual model, personal finance, because not everyone has the same expenses, right? In terms of like someone might have like a student loan or whatever. And
Right.
I think what I've learned over the past 6 years is people can, especially in this day and age where like the influencers and whatever can try and give financial advice, and especially with like the whole cryptocurrency thing, and not to chat about that, but there's a lot of pressures to get into different things just because you feel like you should or whatnot. But whoever you do trust in your circle to run, whether budgets wise or whatever, just making sure you can kind of trust them and speak openly and honestly without any judgments. That's something that I think is really important, just because there are different pressures, or not everyone feels comfortable talking about their income or financial structure or whatever. So being able to talk to, whether it's your friends, peers, colleagues, mentor, financial advisor, whoever, being able to have an open conversation with them about what you want to do, what you want to save.
Heema, that kind of gets into my last question. I could talk to you for much longer.
Yeah.
And it's always a thrill to be able to talk to students that you've enjoyed. But just to keep our time in line, I think the last comment that you have relates kind of to the last question that I'm going to throw at you, which is, what recommendations do you have for students of personal finance, people who were where you were 5 years ago and no longer can say you are? What would you recommend for 22-year-olds today with respect to personal finance and sort of beginning to go into the real world and do the exciting things that you're doing?
It sounds crazy, but if I had to rewind the clock, right, to have probably the biggest piece of advice I have is, the earlier you set those like kind of budget constraints, not even budget constraints, but like I'll say financial goals, right? Whatever it is, right? And I think in this day and age, it's easy, especially when you start working, to spend money whichever way, right? But if you're going to spend money on yourself, like investing in experiences, right? Like dinner with friends, or, however much of your paycheck you're willing to kind of allocate towards experiences, right? And making sure you enjoy yourself, because everyone works really hard.
Heema, you told me you work 7 days a week now,
Yes,
most of the time.
Yes, I do. But I've learned how to tailor that to my lifestyle and being able to enjoy myself at the same time, right? So the earlier, as a 22-year-old, that you can kind of set financial goals for yourself, so not even like budgets, but like saving the 10% or saving X amount, saving more. I know some of my friends are able to set goals like way higher.
Have you heard of the FIRE movement?
I have not.
Financially independent, retire early. These are people who save 50%, 70% of what they make. Now, they don't, there's a guy that I follow, a blog, his name is Mr. Money Mustache, and his gym is in his backyard. He lifts like hunks of concrete. That's not the same as going to your gym and having a few other amenities like towels, for example, or whatever, showers. But nevertheless, there are people whose hope is to, retire when they're 35, and they save a huge amount of what they make, but they make huge concessions in the way they live their life, I think. And you have to be willing to do that if you want that lifestyle.
Absolutely. And to that, I think lifestyle is the biggest thing. I have friends of mine who are able to save like 30 to 40%, that's like their thing. They like to save 30 to 40% of their overall income, whether that be, like they figure out how much of their base or whatever total comp, and they save that amount, right? And I think when you're 22, entering the real world and understanding like the extra expenses with, enjoying yourself for restaurants and all this kind of stuff, like feeling pressure there. I think the biggest word is habit, right? Creating a habit of saving or investing or whatever money you put aside. Time flies, right? But if you create certain disciplines or habits early on as a recent grad, over time, you'll realize, that the nest egg you're saving and whatnot actually really does add up. And if you can do that at 22, you're only going to set yourself up to be that much more financially ahead years down the road, as opposed to, maybe he's trying to save later on.
Remember going over time value of money and how,
Yeah.
$5,000 you put away when you're 22, just from the magic of compounding. And if you use some reasonable knowledge you gained anywhere, reading, personal finance course, whatever, but next thing you know, 10 years later, that 5,000 could be 10. And by the time you're 60, that could be $50,000.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, lean on other like people who you trust to kind of create like a system or model for yourself. But at the end of the day, you have to create a model that works for you. And you can always tweak that, and don't be afraid to tweak that. Not necessarily at the end of the year. So you start a new year with a new. And I think that's also something else I've learned. Everyone talks about what you want to like, especially come December or January. You see it with people going to the gym, setting goals for themselves, and they think, oh, next year I'll go to the gym, or their goal has to start at the beginning of the year. If you halfway through the year or a little bit through the way year, you might have to set different goals or different expectations or different kind of systems for yourself. You can do it, right? It's not like school where there's like 2 different semesters and you have to get a certain grade, or there's like certain time periods. There's a never ending time period, right?
There's a great saying, Heema, when's the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago and today.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a matter of consistency, whether it's going to the gym, saving money, learning, doing a better job with choosing your investments in your 401k. It's a matter of showing up, I think a lot of times.
Absolutely. And big advice, listen to what Professor Mihawk is teaching, and really kind of try to internalize it, because it's one of the few courses, at least that I've taken, that you're actually able to apply it to the real world immediately. And I wish, I had a zillion teachers that would invest the time, and I can't thank you enough for all the time you give me on the side. Club soccer, and that was an integral part to our club soccer program, and getting that. I don't know if you remember the tournament.
I do.
Approved at Villanova.
Yeah. I went out for a couple games. It was great.
Yeah. It's gone different levels, but I'm sure all the students really appreciate all the real world advice that you're giving them, because not everything that you learn can be easily applicable to everyday life, and that's probably the biggest takeaway I've had from the course, and just the whole kind of schooling system. Learning what you can easily apply or try to apply for the rest of, not only as a 22-year-old, but for the rest of your life.
Well, Heema, I appreciate your kind words. I turn back on you, which you gave to me at the beginning. And, you're always lucky when you can coach or teach or be affiliated with people who are engaged in their life. And in terms of coaching and teaching, you want to find people who are motivated to learn and ask questions and apply things. And you've obviously done it. I'd love to keep talking. I'm going to turn the record off in just a moment, because I want to keep this podcast to a reasonable length, but I really appreciate you doing this. I approached you only a few days ago, and you willingly said yes. And I think you're a great example for other young people. And I congratulate you on what you've achieved, Heema. I expect that the chances you take in the future are going to be things like starting your own firm and having a huge payroll one day. I can see it coming soon.
Well, I really appreciate that. It means a lot.
Heema, I'm going to turn off the record, but thank you very much. Stay with me, and then we'll chat, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks so much.